A couple of great labs here coming up on the ASDM. We're going to do some firewall work here too later, but I'm going to use this AnyConnect VPN lab to also introduce you to ASDM in case you haven't seen it before. It's simply a GUI, and frankly, it's very intuitive. And I would give you this word of advice, whether it be for your exam, real-world networking, job interview. If you don't exactly know where to find a piece of information in the ASDM, remain calm and just keep looking around, because it's really not going to be hard to find. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about when we go in, because again, it's about really, when they say it's an intuitive GUI, I got to hand it to Cisco, it really is. Now, in this case, we're going to install the launcher. One thing I like about it is it's going to put a desktop shortcut on our desktop, which is a good place to have it. And as it notes, one desktop shortcut allows you to connect to multiple security appliances. Right now, we're just concerned with one. Thank you very much. When it says I don't have Java Web Start, I do too. I'm introducing a real-world issue that pops up sometimes with ASDM, and that's with Chrome and Java. They don't play well together at all, if at all, anymore. And what I'll do later when I'm actually creating the VPN is I will actually bring up Internet Explorer to do that, but I just used Chrome here out of habit, and here we are. So the thing is, I don't have to worry about Java Web Start. Let's go ahead and just load the launcher or install it, because I want you to see what that's all about. Now at the bottom of the browser, we are going to be scrolling around a little bit, moving around a little bit, but it just shows up at the bottom of the browser. I click on it, and it's going to give the usual warning if you have your laptop set for this, you know, are you sure you want to run this? Also, the certificate we'll be using, the VPN, is going to give us an error message. It's going to say, you know, this is not a secure certificate. It's not, because we made it with the product, and it is not a secure certificate. So when you see these warnings, of course, if you saw them in real-world networking, that would raise a huge red flag for you, but we're just going to have to live with it right here. Now, for the Install Shield Wizard, you just hit yes. It's literally going to take about 2 seconds. And here we go. So I'm going to put Chris and Bryant here. And again, this is part of the config that I did before I started this particular lab. That's way out of the scope of the exam, and I wanted to get straight to the ASDM. But what I will do is put a video at the end of this section showing you exactly what I did on the ASA to make the ASDM launchable, because sometimes that is half the battle. So we're going to hit OK right there. It's going to say it's untrusted. Yes, I trust it because I made it. It's my lab. I trust everything. And it's going to check for software updates, and here we go. Now, I'm not going to shrink this down because sometimes it's hard enough to read as it is. And we are going to be moving around a little bit, but this is the Cisco ASDM. This is version 7.5 for the ASA, and of course your exam will not be exam specific. And frankly, there are little differences between versions, but the last couple of versions, if you go to YouTube and look at earlier versions, you're not going to see a huge change. And what we see right off, looking over here at our interface status, we like up and up, but notice that the interface is named CCNA and then management. The ASA has a management interface. That's what I went in on basically to start the config at 10.1.1.1. And they ask you, you have to name interfaces on the ASA. So when I put an IP address of 10.2.1.1, which is the address we're actually going to configure VPNs to go through, it made you name it. So that's why you see CCNA right there. I just called it that. And the thing is, again, you know, here's firewall, here's licensing information, what the license we have, and then Cisco ASA, and it's just going to tell you a couple things. I'm going to get one more real-world note here before we move on. And it has to do with the wizards, and actually the wizard that we're about to use, because when you click on that, you know, your first option is a startup wizard, and that is for starting up the ASA itself. Then you have all these VPN wizards, which is great. We're going to dive into a couple of those. You have a high availability wizard, a unified communication wizard, an ASDM identity certificate wizard, which is actually what I made to use my certificate, and packet capture wizard. So that's all fine. And the reason that I mention these is that having used an ASA for a very long time, having used ASDM for a long time, when I opened this up, the VPN wizards were not there. And that wasn't what I wanted to see, considering that was the first thing I wanted to use. So if you've ever had that feeling, or you may have it one day, just say, hey man, it happens to everybody. But literally, I just stared at the screen for a few minutes because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, where are my VPN wizards? Here's the deal. Notice this firewall mode, whoops, excuse me, I'll get out of that. Notice this firewall mode of routed. That is not the default, and apparently every other ASA I've ever worked with was already set in routed mode, I guess. They're in transparent mode by default, and if you want an ASA to act as an endpoint for a VPN, it's got to be in routed mode. Has to be. So a little more about those two modes later and exactly what they mean. It's not something, you don't want to make that change on a production ASA or do any of this on a production ASA, of course, unless you're aware of all the other changes that may happen. But just in case you're doing a little lab work, let me save you a headache. It does have to be in routed mode. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into a wizard here. We've got all kinds of monitoring and other stuff going on. But you notice we've got site to site, and I notice you may be looking at that and saying, so you're telling me that we just went through all those steps and built a site-to-site VPN, and we could have come in here and done it in the wizard? And yes, we could have, but first off, as I'm going to show you in a moment, you would have missed a lot of details that, frankly, I expect to be on your exam. As far as the phases and everything else, we really had to hammer that home. And if you go in here, you know, you're really not dealing with too much of that. And for those of you new to these GUIs, they're always going to give you a little introduction or tell you exactly what you're doing, and even a link here to set up a site-to-site VPN connection. And we're not going to watch the video, but we will go ahead and just do next. And that's going to ask you to identify your peer IP address and the VPN access interface, and that's why I mentioned the name of it, CCNA. So let's just say our peer was at 10.1.1.5. This is just going to be a quick walkthrough as I want to show you this. Then you've got your local network and remote network traffic, and when you pick that, you know, you've got something that looks a little bit different than working at the command line, but I could have just done CCNA here and then management for my remote. Again, just an example. And here's what I really wanted to show you. A simple config, literally all you would have entered is the password, the PSK, that's it. And you'll notice it says after that second sentence of the description, ASDM will select common IKE and ISACMP security parameters. For that will allow tunnel establishment. I like the dramatic way they say that. It's recommended this option is also selected when configuring the remote peer. So again, assuming we were doing that and I put a password of CCNA in, NAT exempt, we would probably do that. Exempt local network addresses from network translation. And then you get the summary. And this is something else I wanted to show you, and we'll see a couple of these, is that you're always going to get a summary of what's about to be done before you actually hit finish and put it into action. And if you look under IKE-v1 here, which we know what's going on there, there's IKE-v1. Well, here's the IKE policy, and there's the IPsec proposal. And by golly, I think we're covering all our bases there, and a couple of bases we may not even known existed. So again, we could have used that, and I'm going to go ahead and quit the wizard. But obviously, you would not have been picking up details you need for the exam, so that's why we did that from the command line. And we will go ahead then and get started with a VPN wizard, and we're going to use the AnyConnect VPN wizard. And with us at the 8-minute mark, we will pick up right here when we come back.